Hey there. Welcome to Lead Fearlessly, Strategies of Confident Women Leaders, the podcast that will empower you to unleash your inner strength and embrace leadership with confidence. I'm your host, Katie Winchenbach, and I'm excited to have you join us as we dive into the experiences of extraordinary women who've shattered glass ceilings and redefined success on their own terms. Get ready to be motivated, challenged, and equipped with the tools and strategies to lead fearlessly in your own life and career. We are joined today by Shweta Bhatt. Shweta is an award-winning speaker. She's a professional writer, and I've had the pleasure of hearing her speak on the power of storytelling. And I know she has some amazing advice to share with us. Welcome, Shweta. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie.
So to jump right in, I'll have you briefly describe your journey to where you got to the place that you're at today.
Sure. Yeah. I like to always explain it as I was this kid who was obsessed with trying to figure out how we were all connected. I grew up in a town where no one looked like me, but I wanted to see where were those common points that we connected. And so I would always, seek out opportunities to learn more or opportunities to understand more about myself. And I grew up listening to mythologies and stories and these tales of brilliant people and magical characters and these demigods that, like they were really making an impact on the world. And that's what I wanted to do. And so being the way I was, growing up in an immigrant family, it felt like the only way I could really speak to society or be a, noble participant in my community was to become a doctor. Because how do you help people if you are not saving them from, life-threatening diseases? And that felt like a really noble path. And I was really, really set up. I had set myself up with this pretty flawless, linear path that I just wanted to follow. I was going to do well in high school so that I could get into a good college. And then I got into a good college. I went to Brown University, where I went in thinking, okay, I'm going to go into medicine. This is what I'm going to do. And the reality was, once I got to school, Brown really challenged me to think outside of these small boxes and kind of boundaries of what I thought was a noble profession, what I thought was my way of helping people. And so I had a little bit of an identity crisis because I'm like, wait a second, for all I can remember, I've wanted to be a doctor, and now that's not what I want to be. And I remember kind of fumbling my way through different majors and classes and trying to figure out what the heck do I want to do? And luckily, kind of fell into the class of a mentor who was one of the heads of the anthropology department. And that's where kind of that magic, that illumination of story and culture and how people are connected and why people do the things that they do really got highlighted for me. And I decided to, study anthropology, but that linearity bit never left my mind, where I was like, well, wait a second. Once I graduate college, I'm going to have to get a job and I'm going to have to start making money. So what can I do that can help me on that path? And I took on economics as well. I was always good at math, so it just felt like the right thing. But putting those two together, I started to understand a lot about what empowers communities to be financially stable. What are the pillars within communities that really, really speak to the success of how that community's development goes, how that community's economic stability goes. And what I realized was it's women. It's how women are understood or considered productive or spoken to and received in those communities, that those communities rise above their goals and their visions. And so I was like, this is awesome. Like, I want to learn more about this. I want to put more effort into this. And then graduation came and I took a job and I moved to New York City and I was working in finance consulting. And so, yes, maybe these things did not match what I wanted to do, but it felt like what I had to do. Because once again, I was subscribing to this sense of linearity that was like, no, you have to do this thing in order to be taken seriously, in order to be praised, in order to be just seen as somebody who's successful. And I started working in New York, and the first year was a challenge, and I like a challenge, right? I like rising to the occasion of a challenge. So I put in the hours. I did all the things I could do. I was very honest with them. I'm like, hey, look, I'm an anthropology major. I know nothing about finances. I know nothing about financial engineering, but what I do know how to do is think and learn. And that's where my enthusiasm lies. And so I excelled. And as I was excelling, I realized more and more, like, this is not what I want to be doing. I mean, I found myself building relationships with my clients because I loved listening to their story, not because I cared so much about what financial options we were presenting them with. And it was really interesting because my boss, the man who hired me, took me aside one day. He took me into his office and said, hey, Shweta, when I hired you, you had a spark to you. You really did. And I kind of see that going away. And I don't want to be the reason that, like, you lose this gem about yourself. And what he was speaking to was my ability to hold space for people, my ability to speak vulnerably about myself, my ability to kind of hold space for vulnerability in other people as well. And once again, another identity crisis hit because I was, wait a second, what do I do next then? Because this was supposed to be the thing. I was supposed to get a bunch of cute suit sets, and I was supposed to be presenting and living this romanticized financial consulting life where I was traveling 4 days a week and living in a high rise, all of those things. Like, wait a second, what do I want? And this is when storytelling came back into my life, because now when people ask me, what do you do? What are you doing? What is your plan? We no longer had the ability to say, hi, my name is Shweta and I'm a financial consultant, because I left my job. And I left my job with the idea of going toward a life that felt more authentic instead of running away from a life that just didn't fit me anymore. And that really challenged me, but it also invited me to start understanding who I was outside of the context of the linearity that I had set up for myself. And in doing that, I started listening to myself. I started hearing myself. I started going through my stories and recognizing that being extraordinary was never the goal, but realizing that there was so much magnificence in, like, the ordinary life that I felt like I had already lived. And it was about telling those stories that really helped connect me with people. And you know, the pandemic had hit at the same time. I moved back to my childhood home, and just being in this place where, like, the last time I remember really living there, I was really, really just trying to rise to the expectations of the people around me. I was not, sharing my story. I was not highlighting my story. I was not seeing the importance in it. And this was kind of like a reclamation of that, where I was like, okay, from this space forward, maybe I start really, really understanding who I am and sharing that with the world and sharing that unapologetically. And in doing so, I started kind of connecting with people. I connected with a lot of high school students who are applying to college. And for the first time, they have to write about themselves and they have to describe who they are. And working with them while simultaneously working on sharing my own story and getting up on stage, competing and being in slams and in showcases and on network television. And it really, really spoke to what my mission is today, which is how can I hold space for someone to find safety in their own authenticity. And the medium through which I have seen so many people be able to give themselves that safety, to give themselves the permission to be who they want to be and talk about what they want to do and enjoy who they are in that moment. It's through story.
One of the things that really stood out to me, and I think it's something that a lot of women face, is throughout your journey, you had a lot of moments where you said, this is what I feel like I should be doing. This is the path that I should be following. And I think it's really powerful that you were able to step outside of that, because I think so many of us follow the should path for ourselves.
Of course. And honestly, what helped me through that, and I am still very much a kind of person who should comes in my life often, whether it be in my lifestyle or career choices or personal choices, but I have started to evolve should into can. Like, I can do this. It is an option. And yet I have multiple other options that I can do as well. Each might require different amounts of energy, but when I started translating should into can, it made it feel like the doors were a little bit wider and a little bit more open for me to try different things.
That is such a great suggestion. And the other thing that I think about hearing your story is, wow, this woman had a lot of confidence in herself and in her ability to make things work. And I think confidence is just so important, especially for women throughout our journeys. So I'd love to hear from you. As you were making all of these decisions, how did you build your confidence in yourself?
Confidence it's a fun subject because it feels so transient. One day you can be like on top of the world and the next day something could happen and you could be brought down to your knees. And where confidence really comes from is a conversation around self-compassion. It's around accepting yourself as a human, around accepting that you're going to have imperfections, accepting the fact that as a human, you are not safe from the human condition. Like the feelings and the experiences and the emotions that come up for any other human will also come up from you, and you're not for you and you aren't immune to them. And that's okay. That's actually what makes your life brilliant. But compassion is one of the greatest resources you have when it comes to your own confidence. And something that I was always blessed with as a kid was, and up till now, is an understanding of the resources I have at hand. And that is an awareness that once we start to build that, once we're able to really, really get insight on the resources that exist within us, our skills, our talents, our capability, our aptitude, and our own compassion, and also the resources around us. One of the hardest things when you're making hard decisions, especially ones that challenge so much of what you knew about yourself, is that you feel really lonely because nobody gets it sometimes. You're like, nobody understands where I'm at. And yet, when you realize the resource you have in the people around you, in your community, in the allies that you've created, the conversations that you've had, those two things put together, your inner resources and the resources that exist around you, that awareness also helps kind of cushion your confidence as well, which is like, I'm not alone. There are people behind me, beside me, in front of me. And at the end of it, if I feel like I haven't done something perfectly, and I say perfectly, not wrong, not incorrectly, but I have not done something perfectly, then that's okay, because I'm a human and humans take time.
I think the fact that you use the word perfectly, to me, hits so close to home, because I do think that as women who want to be successful and be high achievers, we bring perfection into that so often.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Perfection, it feels like it's a safety net. It's so funny because people always think perfection is like a ceiling that you're trying to reach. And I actually think perfection is, like that. Have you seen that movie Bubble Boy with Jake Gyllenhaal, where he just like goes around in this bubble and he wants to like keep himself safe from anything that's on the outside? That is fallacy of perfection. Like, I know for me, I think that if I am just perfect, if I do everything perfectly, if I figure out the best way to do all the things, I will be safe from people's judgment, from people's disapproval, from my own disapproval or discouragement, from my own self-judgment. And when I say fallacy, like, that's incorrect. Because once again, we don't exist in a bubble. We don't exist so safeguarded from the world. And actually, who wants to exist that way? Like, who wants to be so separate from the world around us? And so when we start to realize that perfection is actually what encloses us versus what allows us to rise and be full and be open, then you start to realize, maybe perfection is not what I'm striving for. Maybe it's acceptance.
And tell me a little more. It sounds like you have great personal experience with some of this. Tell us about a time where you did not do something perfectly, as we all don't do, but you still had a really great outcome where you really learned something from it, and kind of how you were able to reframe your mindset to see perfection as something that's holding you back.
Yeah. So it was, I'll go back to when I left my financial job, where, it, from the outside, some people thought like, wow, what an amazing thing you're doing. It's so brave. Like, you're leaving this 6-figure job that like you get 401k and all of that. And you're just like, going to do your own thing. Like, how amazing. And, it was this idea that like, I felt so without and uncertain. I didn't know what I was doing next. I knew I had to do something next. And so I joke about it, but that day when I left my job, my last day, I went on a date, and the guy was asking me, so like, what are you going to do on your first day of unemployment? And I said, I'm going to make pancakes. And he just looks at me and he starts laughing. And I'm like, that's not a joke. And what pancakes were to me was like this cooking kryptonite. Like, I am a force in the kitchen. I grew up in a family that cooked a lot. The women are amazing cooks. And I would like to say that I have tried my best to kind of hold that torch and carry it forward. But pancakes were always so hard for me to do because they were never perfect. Like my pancakes would splatter and they would like burn sometimes on one side, and it wouldn't be perfectly brown and it wouldn't be perfectly round or any of those things. So I had told myself, tomorrow I am going to practice this thing. And my idea or my goal was to make the perfect pancake. And what I realized as I was making the pancakes, and some were flopping and some were splattering and some were burning and some looked like Africa, the continent, versus like a round circle. What I was realizing there was that, wait a second, like, it's not about practice making perfect. It's about realizing that through practice, you start to define different things. What I had in front of me was not a stack of perfectly round pancakes. What I had in front of me was a stack of multiply shaped, like all different types of doneness pancakes that were all edible. I hadn't made a mistake because nothing wasn't edible. I had just done something that was different than the way the world had told me it always has to look. When you look at a magazine, you never see a pancake that is triangle shaped or that is shaped like, some sort of amoeba. You always see perfectly round ones. And that's what we're conditioned to do. And this idea of leaving my job and having the perfect plan going forward, even if that was more of an esoteric plan to start storytelling or holding supper clubs or start my own business, we were never shown the journey that people had where they were making the messy but edible pancakes, the choices that weren't so glorious and romanticized, but the choices that were important and the choices that kept them going, and sometimes the choices that brought them to their lowest lows and got them to a point where the only place they could look was up. And so for me, leaving my job, making pancakes, putting myself in situations where I know my resources at hand, I know my capabilities at hand, and yet I'm new. I've never done this before. I'm a beginner, and thus I'm allowed to have that beginner's mindset. And one of the most brilliant things about the beginner's mindset is enthusiasm. And it's the lack of self-judgment, because you're a beginner. Why would you be perfect right off the bat? And if we allow ourselves to be beginners over and over again, like that judgment that exists around, I must be perfect, I must do this, it starts to fade away. It starts to give ourselves more freedom to maybe make something that doesn't look so aesthetic, or something that looks so perfect, or something that looks so nice and tied up in a bow, but really invites us to say, hey, like, find confidence in your authenticity as you're doing it. And that's what I did. I told people after I left when I was struggling, like, when they told me I was doing something brave, and I was like, I don't think I'm doing anything brave. When they told me like, wow, I can't believe what an amazing idea and this and that. I'm like, yeah, it's an amazing idea, and I have no steps forward to it yet. I was honest, but I wasn't honest in a way that was self-deprecating. I was honest in a way that said, hey, yeah, I made this decision, and also I don't have it all figured out, and I don't think I will ever, but I'm figuring it out as I go.
The concept of the beginner's mindset that you said, honestly, just gave me chills. I think that it's so important and something that is not talked about nearly enough in any sort of setting.
Yeah, it really isn't, because there's always, there feels like there is this sense, whether in like an institutional setting, an organizational setting, even like a societal setting, that you need to be so superlative at whatever you do. And that's not the reality. Once again, it's this concept of like extraordinary. It's this concept of doing all of the things and doing perfectly. Like, I was obsessed with Forbes 30 under 30 when I was little. I was like, oh my God, I want to be on Forbes 30 under 30. And I remember talking to somebody on the eve of my 30th birthday. And they were like, so Shweta, like, how does it feel turning 30? And I go, I thought that not being on Forbes 30 under 30 or not hitting all of these thresholds in my life would be my greatest failure. That I would go into 30 feeling so badly about myself. And yet, my greatest failure that I recognized on the eve of my 30th birthday was the fact that I chose not to live a life that didn't feel authentic to me. Like, that was the failure, the ability to live a life that wasn't mine. And it's when you recognize that authenticity and vulnerability and just your own humanity are the things that ground you, are the things that humble you, are the things that surprise you every single day because you learn something new. That's when really tapping into the beginner's mindset feels more tangible. Because when you like consider yourself more than a human, like exceptional to something, these things can't happen to me. Well, why can't they happen to you? They happen to literally everyone else. That's when tapping into the beginner's mindset really, really feels like an option, because it's when you learn something new every day, when you're a student of yourself, your inner landscape and your outer landscape in the world, you tend to recognize, like, I will never know everything. Something I will learn almost every single day. And it makes it a little easier to be like, okay, well, I know what I know, but I'm open to learning more. And so it's not about being like, I know nothing, but it's about being open to learning more.
That is so powerful. There's just the freeing idea of being a beginner and allowing ourselves to have that exploration, that enthusiasm, the grace and the compassion that comes with it. I absolutely love that idea. And I think it ties in so well, really, with kind of the intent behind this podcast. The title is Lead Fearlessly, and being able to go out and really be bold, be enthusiastic. So, Shweta, what does it mean to you, the concept of leading fearlessly?
When I hear that, it reminds me a lot of Brené Brown and her book, Daring Greatly. And she always talks about, that warrior that she talks about, that Teddy Roosevelt quote, where it's that warrior that's like in the middle of the arena with, on their knees or with like scrapes on their face or all of those things, but the fact that they showed it. For me, leading fearlessly, it is about learning to not fear your own humanity. It's not about, breaking down every wall you see or cutting down every tree or smashing through every glass ceiling. Leading fearlessly is about understanding that you are a human first, that you have stories that exist within you, that you have qualities that evolve over time, and that you are going to be experiencing cycles out your life where you feel on top of the world and you also feel extremely discouraged. Leading fearlessly is about not fearing your own humanity and really, really honing this ability to be both, right? To really highlight and capitalize the word and. Like, I can be this and I can be that. I can think this way and I can change my mind. And so when I encourage someone to lead fearlessly, what I'm really saying is don't fear the human experience. Don't fear the emotions that feel hard to deal with. Don't fear, the elation when you reach a goal that you've been striving for your entire life. Don't fear the lack of applause when you do something that matters to you. Don't fear the judgment when you finally open yourself up to be that authentic version of yourself. Don't fear those things, because the only thing that's going to stop you is the idea that you're not allowed to be human. You are. And so in order to lead fearlessly, lead from a place where you accept, you hold, and you empower your own humanity.
Wow. And I always ask this question at the end of our podcast time, and you really kind of answered it with this last one. But if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self as you're starting your leadership, as you're starting your career, as you're navigating all of these things, what would that piece of advice be?
Don't worry about being ready. When you get there, that's your sign that you have what it takes to be ready.
The end, I mean, the whole thing was amazing, but the ending of it literally giving me goosebumps. Shweta, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of these insights.
Of course. Thank you for having me. And I know the women listening to this podcast and just the people listening in general have the most potential to be brilliant leaders, because they're even just allowing themselves to be in spaces where this conversation is happening. And I thank you, and I'm grateful for you creating a space for these conversations to happen.
Thank you, Shweta. And really, I'm so excited we were able to have you on to talk to us today. To learn more about Shweta and how you can work with her, visit her website, shwetabhatt.com. Thanks for tuning in to Lead Fearlessly, Strategies of Confident Women Leaders. If you've been inspired by today's episode, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a friend who could use a confidence boost. Remember to subscribe so you won't miss out when we drop our next season. And if you found our conversations valuable, please leave us a 5-star review. Your support helps us continue to amplify the voices of incredible women leaders and inspire more fearless female trailblazers.